Objectives resolution passed 6 months after Jinnah's death, and which tried to strike a balance between the ideologues and the secular westernized elites, only laid further basis for ambiguity. The country's first Prime Minister, Mr. Ayub Khan, himself laid the basis for a measure of this ambiguity by proclaiming Pakistan as a laboratory for a truly Islamic social order, on the one hand, and on the other, he called for a truly liberal government that was inclusive and that would safeguard the rights of its minorities and that would permit the greatest amount of freedom to all its citizens, regardless of what their religion, caste or creed was. An early indication of the lip service paid to religion for purposes of political expediency, it should not be confused by any means with a lowering of defenses against the self-proclaimed guardians of Islam. This obviously later became a characteristic of the Pakistani leadership, especially after the 1970s. Ayub Khan let it be known in no uncertain terms that the malicious propaganda of the so-called religious leaders against the right of non-Muslims to equal citizenship would never be permitted. Nevertheless, this was the opening religio-political groups seized to claim authenticity for their own brand of Islam, bristling with exclusivist, chauvinistic and misogynist social values. Things came to a head in 1953, an early indication of just how significant a space had been conceded to self-appointed guardians of Islam by the Objectives Resolution was the agitation in 1953 to ostracize the heterodox Ahmadis from the pale of the Muslim community. The anti-Ahmadi movement turned violent and resulted in the first ever imposition of martial law in Pakistan. It was spearheaded by the same elements that had been most vocal in denouncing the demand for Pakistan and abusing the Muslim League's preeminent leader, Mr. Jinnah. Most of the ulama questioned by the 1954 Inquiry Commission said that declaring Ahmadis non-Muslims had become an imperative after the Objectives Resolution. The Objectives Resolution which left no room for doubt that Pakistan was created solely in the name of Islam. It followed that the state had an obligation to define who was a Muslim and who was not. Laying down the precise definition of true believer was a dangerous game of brinkmanship. This was precisely why before the 1937 elections and later on, Jinnah had refused to endorse the demand to ostracize Ahmadis from the Muslim community. With the establishment of Pakistan, there was even more reason to reject the faulty logic of the anti-Ahmadi agitators. Even if they could not match his constitutionalist vision, Jinnah's constitutionalist vision, the last thing Jinnah's successors needed was to inject an exclusionary strain into the narratives of the nation at a time when the main challenge facing Pakistan as a modern nation state was to extend equal rights of citizenships to all its inhabitants. These gestures to Islam did not, however, alter the essentially secular thrust of state policies until the mid-1970s. The anti-Ahmadi agitation and how it was handled set the future course of action for the Pakistani state on this particular issue. Daultana, who was the Chief Minister of Punjab, was manipulating the anti-Ahmadi agitation to wrangle his way into prime ministerial office. So Nazimuddin, the Prime Minister, went a step further. To placate the self-styled representatives of Islam, he was not only willing to consider the demands of the ulama to declare the Ahmadis non-Muslims, but he also agreed to give the clerics a greater say in the affairs of the state. A board of 5 ulama was to advise the head of the state on whether a law was repugnant to Islam or not. This was abhorrent to the die-hard secularists who controlled the central government. The role of religion and federal question had plagued the constitution making in Pakistan right from the start. It was exacerbated by the interventions by Governor General Ghulam Muhammad. Dr. Jalal writes, a major constitutional crisis reared its head in September 1954 when a group of politicians in the Constituent Assembly tried clipping the Governor General's powers to dismiss a cabinet that was in theory responsible to the Parliament. This would have spelled the end of Ghulam Muhammad, who after being paralyzed by a stroke could neither think nor speak clearly and was confined to a wheelchair. With the support of Doltana in Punjab, Khoro in Sindh, sections of business community as well as the Chief Justice of Pakistan, Ghulam Muhammad dismissed the Constituent Assembly on October 24, 1954, just a few days after the Assembly had agreed on a constitution. This was challenged by Maulvi Tamizuddin Khan, the Bengali president of the Constituent Assembly in the Sindh High Court, which ruled in his favour. However, this judgment was overturned by the federal court under Justice Munir, thus setting a most regrettable precedent that destroyed Pakistan's nascent democracy. The 1954 constitution was never put in place, and it delayed Pakistan's evolution from a dominion to a republic further. It was not until 23rd of March 1956 that Pakistan got its first constitution. Parity between the two wings was the foundational principle of the constitution that was adopted by this second Constituent Assembly. Pakistan was to be an Islamic republic, and the Objectives Resolution of 1949 inserted as the preamble to the constitution. The repugnancy clause was incorporated, but Islam significantly was not declared as a state religion. Rights of equal citizenship were guaranteed to all irrespective of religion or sect. The liberal democratic concept of government limited by rule of law was enshrined in the constitution. There was an elaborate list of inalienable fundamental rights, and the judiciary was empowered to enforce them against encroachments by the executive and the legislature. With the potentially disruptive issue of the role of Islam in the state temporarily out of the way, the Praetorian Guard and its Mandarin friends sanguinely accepted the Constituent Assembly's stance on fundamental rights. As they knew too well, the proof of the pudding lay in its eating. The constitution provided a form of parliamentary democracy that was as close to a military bureaucratic conception of a presidential system as was possible. The 1956 constitution reflected rather than remedied the institutional balances that had crept into the evolving structure of the state. The democratic process in any event was stalled on October 7, 1958, when Pakistan's first president, Major General Iskandar Mirza, declared martial law and abrogated the constitution. 1962 constitution was railroaded by General Ayub Khan, Pakistan's first coup maker. This was a significant departure from the 1956 constitution in many ways. It was a presidential type of constitution with basic democrats or local electors forming the electorate for both the president and the National Assembly. The state's designation was changed from the Islamic Republic to the Republic of Pakistan, and all references to the Quran and Sunnah in the 1956 constitution were deleted. The judiciary was stripped of the powers to question any law passed by the legislature. This, of course, was remedied by the First Amendment to the Constitution, which made fundamental rights defensible by the judiciary and also changed the name of the country back to include Islamic in the name Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The fairness of the basic democracies was tested in the 1965 presidential election. What followed was a thoroughly rigged electoral process. There were blatant financial irregularities, misuse of government resources, and extensive electoral malpractice. Ms. Fatma Jinnah, nevertheless, gave Ayub a few palpitations with her good showing in East Pakistan and Karachi. Ultimately, the regime won, bagging 49,951 votes against 28,691 for Fatma Jinnah. This basically spelled the beginning of the end for both the 1962 constitution and the Ayub regime.